Augusta Bellamy didn't ask. She didn't warn. She simply walked into the drawing room, dropped a legal document onto the table in front of her niece, and said, "Sign it. You're getting married in the morning." Rosalie Mercer looked down at the paper. She saw her own name. She saw the amount written beside it. $5,000. She looked up at the woman who had called herself family for 4 years. "How much of your debt," Rosalie said quietly, "does my life erase?" Augusta slapped her hand flat across the document. "All of it." If that sentence just stopped your breath, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and follow Rosalie's story all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The document was already signed on Augusta's line. Rosalie read every word of it. Twice. She was the kind of woman who read everything twice, not from slowness, but from 4 years of learning that the danger was always in the sentence you skimmed. Her name, the date, the name of the man receiving her. Silas Blackwood. Blackwood Ridge, Albemarle County, Virginia. She knew that name. Everyone in the county knew that name the way they knew about bad weather, coming not from seeing it directly, but from the way people lowered their voices when it came up. The Scar, they called him. The recluse of Blackwood Ridge. The man whose last business partner left the county without a word of explanation. The man Mrs. Hargrove swore had dismissed 3 housekeepers in a single month. Enormous, dangerous, unstable, and Augusta had sold her to him for $5,000. Rosalie set the document down. "When did he sign?" she asked. "This morning." "You didn't tell me." "I'm telling you now." "That isn't the same thing." Augusta's chin lifted. "You have lived in my home for 4 years, Rosalie. You have eaten at my table. I have managed your creditors," Rosalie said. Her voice stayed flat, controlled. "I have kept this house from being seized twice. I have written your correspondence, balanced your accounts, and smiled at your guests, while you told them I was a distant relation come to help with household matters." She paused. "I was never a guest here, Augusta. Don't pretend this is ingratitude." Augusta's hand moved fast. Not a slap. Worse, the sharp, dismissive crack of her palm against the tabletop right beside Rosalie's hand. Close enough to make her flinch. Close enough to be a reminder. "You will go," Augusta said, "and you will behave like a woman of dignity, and you will not embarrass this family." Rosalie looked at her. "What family?" she said. Outside, horses stopped in the drive. He didn't knock. The front door opened, and Silas Blackwood came into Augusta Bellamy's drawing room the way weather comes into a place without permission, without ceremony, and with the immediate effect of making everything already present feel smaller. How was enormous. That registered first before anything else. 6 feet and more broad through their shoulders, in a way that had nothing to do with vanity and everything to do with years of actual work, hauling, building, riding, surviving. His coat was dark and wet from the rain. He moved with a slight hitch in his right leg. Old damage healed imperfect, and he carried it the way he apparently carried everything, without apology and without explanation. The scar ran from his left temple toward his jaw. It wasn't subtle. It pulled faintly at the corner of his eye, and in the lamplight it was impossible to look at him and not see it first. Rosalie looked at it first. Then she looked at his eyes. Dark gray. Still. The eyes of a man who scanned a room before he entered it, who counted exits without thinking about counting them, who had learned somewhere in his life that stillness was a form of control. He scanned the room. He found Augusta. He found Rosalie. And then, before he looked at her face, his gaze dropped to her wrists, where Augusta's grip from 2 days ago had left a ring of bruise gone yellow-green at the edges, now still visible above her cuff if you were looking. He was looking. His expression didn't change dramatically. It shifted, something going quiet in it, something going careful and deliberate, the way a man goes. Careful when he has seen something he recognizes and is deciding with great intentionality what to do about it. Augusta stepped forward. "Mr. Blackwood, we are so pleased." "I have adjustments to the settlement terms," he said. His voice was low, unhurried. The voice of a man who chose words before he spoke them, and as a result spoke less than most people expected. Augusta's smile didn't move. "Of course. Please sit. They're in Miss Mercer's favor." The smile stayed in place. Her eyes went flat. "How generous," she said. "Not generous," Silas said. "Fair." He crossed to the writing table, removed documents from inside his coat, and laid them alongside Augusta's agreement. He didn't sit. He stood the entire time, which had the effect of making the room feel like his room, even though he'd entered it 3 minutes ago. Rosalie read what he'd added. Her own funds separate from the marital estate. Her own legal standing. A clause specifying she could not be compelled to perform labor she hadn't agreed to in advance. She read that last clause twice. She looked up. He wasn't watching her read. He was signing his name at the bottom of the new agreement with the efficient calm of a man who had already decided everything he intended to decide and was now simply completing the documentation. "She'll need to sign as well," he said to Augusta. Not a question. Augusta's voice came out thinner than before. "Naturally." The pen was placed in front of Rosalie. She picked it up. Her hand didn't shake. She signed. She was proud of that, later, that her hand hadn't shaken. She carried one small cloth bag out of Bellamy House. Augusta did not come to the door. Rosalie didn't look back. There was nothing behind her worth the turning. She climbed into Silas Blackwood's carriage and sat very straight, with her hands folded in her lap and her spine doing the work of a woman who had learned that taking up too much space in other people's spaces had consequences. The interior was dark leather worn from real use. A lamp near the door. A wool blanket on the seat. A wool coat folded on the opposite bench. Silas climbed in across from her. He said nothing. The carriage moved. Rain hit the roof. Horses breathed. The lamp swayed. The silence between them was not comfortable, but it was not hostile either. It was the silence of two people who had not yet determined what they were to each other and were not going to pretend otherwise. Then the carriage hit a rut. Hard and sudden, the left wheels dropping into a storm gully, the whole frame lurching sideways. The lamp swung violent. The door rattled. Rosalie's arms came up before she knew she'd moved them. Both arms over her head. Her body folding into the corner of the carriage, the way it had learned to fold, the way it folded automatically when something sudden happened, because sudden things had taught her that they were generally followed by something worse. She held that position for 2 full seconds. Then she understood. The carriage had hit a rut. Just a rut. She lowered her arms slowly. Silas was watching her, not with horror. Not with the uncomfortable pity of someone who'd witnessed something they wished they hadn't. He watched her with the careful stillness of a man who understood exactly what he had just seen and was making a very deliberate decision about what to do with that understanding. He reached to the seat beside him. He lifted the heavy wool coat, his coat, the one he'd arrived in, and placed it on the seat between them. Not around her shoulders, not handed directly to her, just placed, between them, available. You don't have to ask permission," he said, "to be warm." Rosalie looked at the coat, then at him. He had already turned back to the window. She sat beside that coat for a long time with her hands in her lap. It wasn't stubbornness. It was the particular paralysis of a woman who had learned over years that objects offered by people in power were almost never just objects. They were the opening entry of a debt, the first line in a ledger that would eventually come due. But the night was cold, and he wasn't watching. She took the coat. She put it around her shoulders and sat very still inside its weight. Heavy, warm smelling of wood smoke and rain. And she watched the scarred side of his face in the lamplight. The side everyone looked away from, and she thought about a man who had added protective clauses to a legal agreement before he'd ever spoken 10 words to the woman they protected. She didn't trust it. She didn't know what to do with it, but she pulled the coat tighter and she kept watching, and she thought, whatever you are, Silas Blackwood, you are not what they said. She didn't know yet whether that was better or worse. Blackwood House was nothing like what she'd built in her head during the ride. She'd braced for something Gothic, the crumbling residence of a man, the county called dangerous, all broken shutters and creeping damp. What she found instead was a large working house. Federal-style brick, well-maintained lights burning in several windows. The kind of property that someone cared for, practically no sculpted ornamental shrubbery, no imported marble but solid stone steps, and a front door that fit its frame without draft. Someone actually lived here. Someone who cared about function. Miriam Pike met them at the door. Short, wide, steel-gray hair pulled severely back, and an expression that communicated both deep practicality and profound skepticism simultaneously. She looked at Rosalie the way a woman looks at someone new to a house she has managed for decades, assessing, weighing, reserving judgment. "Mrs. Blackwood," Miriam said. "Miss Mercer is fine," Rosalie said before she'd thought about whether to say it. Miriam's eyebrows moved slightly upward. Silas from behind her. "Whatever she prefers." He moved past them both into the house. Rosalie's coat, his coat, was still around her shoulders. He didn't ask for it back. The bedroom was on the second floor. East-facing windows, a fire already burning, a good bed, a writing desk. Simple. Clean. Like someone had thought about what a person actually needs, rather than what a person is supposed to display. There was a lock on the door. She saw it the moment she walked in. Old brass hardware, solid and deliberate. The keyhole on the interior side. Silas appeared in the doorway. He didn't enter. He stood at the threshold, filling it. Certainly a man that size filled any threshold, but he stopped there. Stayed there. Like a man who understood the difference between a doorway and an invitation. "There's a key," he said. He held it up. Brass. Heavy. Real. He crossed to the door. She stepped back just slightly, an automatic adjustment, and he fitted the key into the interior lock and turned it. The bolt engaged with a clean, decisive sound. He turned it back. Removed the key. He held it out to her. "It locks from your side," he said. "Only from your side." Rosalie took the key from his hand. Their fingers didn't touch. He made sure of that, held the key by its shaft, and angled it so she could take the bow without contact. She noticed that, filed it. "Whatever your aunt told you," Silas said. "Whatever you heard about me before tonight." He paused. Finding words, she realized. He wasn't being dramatic, he was genuinely searching. "You weren't brought here to serve me." She looked at the key in her hand. "Then why did you pay her?" She hadn't planned to ask it. It came out quiet. Genuine. The question of a woman who had spent 4 years trying to understand the economics of people who claimed to care for her and didn't, trying to find the real price underneath every apparent kindness. Silas was quiet for a moment. "Because," he said, "it was the only price she would accept for letting you go." He stepped back from the doorway. "Miriam will bring supper if you want it. You don't have to come down." He paused. "You don't have to do anything tonight, Miss Mercer. Just be." Then he walked away. She heard his uneven footsteps move down the hallway, that slight hitch, that imperfect heeled thing, growing quieter, and then gone. No pause outside her door. No waiting to see if she'd call him back. Rosalie stood alone. She crossed to the door. She turned the key. The bolt engaged. She stood with her hand on it and felt something happen in her chest that she couldn't name immediately. Not relief, not safety, not hope, because she'd learned not to reach for those words too fast. Something quieter than any of them. Something that had to do with the fact that she was standing inside a room and the lock was under her hand and nobody outside could open it. Not without her. She had not had that. Not in 4 years. Not since her parents' house, the rooms that were genuinely hers, the doors that people respected because they respected the person behind them. She sat on the edge of the bed. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm was moving east. She put her face in her hands. She cried. Not because she'd been sold, not because she was afraid. She cried because she was sitting in a locked room in a frightening man's house, and it was the closest thing to safe she had felt in 4 years. And she was terrified, bone-deep terrified, by how desperately she wanted that to be true. She woke twice in the night. First time, a sound in the hallway. Her body was upright before she was fully awake, heart already running. She sat in the dark and listened until she understood. A house settling. Cooling timber. Nothing more. She lay back down. Second time a dream she couldn't catch by the time her eyes opened. Just the feeling of it, the specific weight of anxiety that 4 years in Bellamy House had pressed into her like a groove worn into wood. She lay still and listened to Blackwood House breathe around her. Quiet. Thoroughly quiet. No footsteps with intention in them. No doors. No voice behind a wall. She pressed her palm flat to the mattress. Good mattress. Someone had made decisions about this room that went beyond minimum function. She thought about the key on the nightstand. She thought about the man who'd handed it to her angled so their fingers wouldn't touch. Whatever your aunt told you, you weren't brought here to serve me. She stared at the ceiling and looked for the manipulation in it. She was still looking when she fell back asleep. She was up before the house. She made her own bed hospital corners, pillow-centered coverlet smooth from habit, so deep it was almost physical. Then she sat at the writing desk in the gray morning light and did what she always did in a new situation. She tried to understand it. By the time Miriam knocked, not entered. Rosalie had already begun constructing a mental map of what a property this size required. Staff, probably 4 or 5 for the house alone. Supply chains for a working estate. Accounts, records, ledgers. She opened the door. Miriam stood with a breakfast tray. She looked at the made bed, at Rosalie's composed posture, at the complete absence of the distress a woman brought against her will to a frightening stranger's house might reasonably display. Something moved through Miriam's expression. Recognition, Rosalie thought, or something close to sorrow. "You sleep?" Miriam asked. "Adequately," Rosalie said. "Does the house have a household ledger?" Miriam blinked. Yes. And estate accounts, supply records, staff rolls. There are records. I'd like to look at them." Rosalie paused. "When it's appropriate to ask." Miriam set the tray down slowly. She looked at Rosalie the way a woman looks at something she didn't expect to find where she found it. "You keep accounts," she said. "I managed a household in serious debt for 4 years without losing it," Rosalie said. "Yes, ma'am, I keep accounts." Miriam studied her for a long moment. "I'll mention it to Mr. Blackwood," she said. She saw Silas at noon. He came through the back corridor, boots carrying the mud of a man who'd been on the land since first light. He stopped when he saw her in the hallway. She stopped too, 8 feet between them, both still. "Miss Mercer," he said. "Mr. Blackwood." She didn't let herself hesitate. "I asked Miriam about the household accounts. She told me. I'd like to look at them, the estate records too." She held his gaze. "I think your numbers aren't adding up correctly. Not from bad management. From something worse." Something sharpened in his expression. Not defensiveness. Attention. "Worse," he said. "How do you mean?" "I mean, I spent 4 years learning what it looks like when someone is deliberately moving money in a way they don't want noticed," Rosalie said. "And from what Miriam described about your supply records, the pattern's familiar." Silas was quiet for a moment. "You could be wrong," he said. "I could be," she agreed. "Let me look at the ledgers and find out." He studied her. She kept her chin level and waited the particular waiting of a woman who had learned never to fill silence with apology or qualification. "After supper," he said. "The ledgers will be on the desk." He moved past her toward the stairs. "Mr. Blackwood." He stopped. "Thank you," she said. "For the room, the key." He turned just enough to look at her over his shoulder. The scarred side. "Don't thank me for that," he said. The words came out rough, not unkind, just unpolished the way a man sounds when he's saying something he means strongly and hasn't practiced. A locked door is the minimum a person deserves. The fact that it felt like a gift. He stopped. His jaw worked once. "That says something about where you came from, not something about what you're owed." He went upstairs. Rosalie stood in the hallway and didn't move for a long moment. "That says something about where you came from, not something about what you're owed." She had spent 4 years in Augusta Bellamy's house being made to feel that every small comfort, every warm meal, every adequate dress, every roof overhead was a debt accumulating against her. A ledger of obligation that could never quite be paid down. Silas Blackwood had just told her in 8 words that the ledger had been wrong from the start. She wasn't sure she knew how to live in a world where that was true. But she thought, standing in the hallway of Blackwood House, with the sound of his uneven footsteps fading above her, she thought she might want to find out. That evening, she sat down across from him at the study desk for the first time. The ledgers were open. 3 of them, heavy leather-bound, the records of Blackwood Ridge going back 11 years. Silas sat across from her with a glass of water at his elbow and his scarred forearms on the desk, and the expression of a man prepared to be shown something he wasn't going to like. Rosalie turned pages. She ran her finger down columns. She cross-referenced. She flipped back and forward with the focused efficiency of someone who had spent years learning to read numbers the way other people read faces. Silas watched her work. He didn't interrupt. He didn't lean over to check her conclusions before she reached them. He didn't make the particular sounds men made when they were monitoring a woman's reasoning, the small clearing of throats, the slight shifts that signaled readiness to correct. He just watched. After 20 minutes, Rosalie stopped. She turned the ledger so he could see the column she'd been tracking. She placed her finger on a line and looked up at him. "This shipment," she said, 60 casks of tobacco logged as received 3rd week of September. "Yes," Silas said. "This entry," she turned back 1 page, "shows the same 60 casks already logged as received 2nd week of August." He leaned forward. "Same casks," she said, "logged twice, 6 weeks apart. Different totals on each entry, one with full value, one showing a 40% loss to water damage. Loss was claimed. The amount was written off." She kept her voice level. "Someone collected payment for tobacco that was never damaged, possibly never shipped at all." Silas stared at the page. "Show me another one," he said. She turned to October, then to the livestock records, then to the tenant payment rolls for the East Fields. With each page, his expression grew more still, not calmer, but the stillness of something very large going, very quiet, in the way that large things do before they move. "How long?" he said. "At least 3 years from what I can trace tonight," Rosalie said. "Probably longer. It's careful work. Whoever did this understood your records well enough to hide inside them." She paused. "They're still doing it. The most recent false entry is from last month." Silas sat back in his chair. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said something Rosalie had not expected. "I thought it was me," he said. "I thought I'd managed it badly. Lost track. Let things deteriorate." He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the open ledger with an expression she recognized, the expression of a person who had been carrying blame for something that wasn't theirs to carry. I'm not a man who shows weakness easily. Admitting the estate was failing felt like..." He stopped. "Like being exactly who they say you are," Rosalie said quietly. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. She held his gaze. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, "you've been robbed. By someone who knew you well enough to make you blame yourself for it." She turned another page. "That's not weakness. That's betrayal." He was quiet. "We need to find out who," she said. "And I can help you do that, if you'll let me." He looked at the ledgers, then at her. He pulled another chair up beside the desk. "Show me where to start," he said. And those 4 words, "show me where to start," landed somewhere in Rosalie Mercer's chest, like the first sound of something long frozen, beginning very slowly to move. Not because he needed her, but because he'd asked. Because he'd pulled up a chair and asked, as if her knowledge were a thing worth sitting down for. As if she were. Outside Blackwood House, the Virginia night settled over the land. Somewhere in the East Fields, someone was sleeping easy on money that wasn't theirs. They didn't know yet that the woman who could read their deception had just arrived. They didn't know yet what was coming. 3 days into Blackwood House, Rosalie found the bread. Or rather, Miriam found her finding it. She had tucked 2 dinner rolls inside a folded napkin and placed them at the back of the wardrobe drawer behind the spare stockings, with the particular efficiency of someone who had performed this action many times before and had long stopped thinking of it as unusual. Miriam stood in the doorway holding fresh linens and didn't say a word. Rosalie didn't explain. She straightened up and smoothed her skirt and looked at Miriam with an expression that dared the woman to comment. Miriam set the linens on the chair. She turned to leave. Then she stopped. "Breakfast is at 6:30, Miriam said without turning around. "Dinner at noon, supper at 7. Nobody goes hungry in this house, Miss Mercer. Nobody has in the 11 years I've kept it." "I know," Rosalie said. "Do you?" Miriam said. She turned then. She looked at Rosalie the way a woman looks at a situation she recognizes from experience and wishes she didn't. Because knowing a thing up here, she touched her temple, and knowing it here, she placed her hand flat over her sternum, are two different things entirely. And until the second kind of knowing catches up, there is no shame in keeping bread in a drawer. She left. Rosalie looked at the wardrobe for a long time. Then she left the bread where it was. She wasn't ready to not need it yet. But she thought about what Miriam had said for the rest of the morning, and she thought that this woman, this blunt, efficient, steel-spined woman who had kept Blackwood House for 11 years, might be the first person in 4 years who had looked at something shameful in Rosalie and named it without weaponizing it. That was its own kind of startling. She went downstairs to make herself useful, because making herself useful was still the only way she knew how to stay. The accounts consumed her. She had told Silas she could find the source of the discrepancies, and she had meant it, and now she sat every evening at the study desk, with the ledgers and cross-referenced shipping records, and followed the numbers the way a hunter follows tracks, patiently, methodically, never assuming she knew where they led until she got there. Silas worked across the desk from her most evenings. I didn't interfere. He brought his own correspondence, his own land records, and he worked in the same focused silence she did, and occasionally he would ask a question, direct, specific, never condescending, and she would answer it, and they would go back to their separate work. It was not what she had expected. She had expected management, instruction, the particular supervision of a man who has been told that a woman can be useful and is prepared to confirm or deny this thesis at every available opportunity. Instead, Silas treated her the way he treated everything else about her, as simply a fact of the situation, not a pleasant surprise to be commented upon. On the 4th evening, he set down his pen and looked at her. "You haven't eaten supper," he said. "I'm not hungry. It's 9 o'clock. I'm aware of the time, Mr. Blackwood." "You were aware of it at 7 too," he said. "When Miriam brought the tray, and you thanked her, and moved it aside and kept working." Rosalie looked up. He was watching her with that particular stillness of his, not accusing, not parental, just observant. The way a man watches something he's trying to understand without getting in the way of it. "I'll eat when I'm done," she said. "You'll eat now," he said. "The ledgers will be here tomorrow." She opened her mouth. "Rosalie." He said her name plainly. First time without the miss in front of it. It landed with unexpected weight. "The books will keep. Eat something." She ate. She didn't examine too closely why his saying her name like that, just her name without ceremony or formality, had made her pick up the fork. She wasn't ready to examine that yet either. On the 6th morning, she made a mistake. She went to the kitchen before anyone was up, and she used the last of the firewood in the kitchen grate to heat water for washing, because the water was cold, and she was used to managing her own needs quietly and early before the household stirred, before she could be accused of consuming more than her portion. When Cook arrived an hour later, there was no firewood for the morning kitchen fires. Cook, a large, good-natured woman named Dell, who had apparently never in her life been accused of insufficient volume, expressed her feelings about this situation at considerable length. Rosalie stood in the kitchen doorway and took it. She had learned that taking it was faster than defending herself. She folded her hands in front of her, and she looked at a point slightly above Dell's left shoulder, and she said, "You're right. I apologize. It won't happen again. First the wardrobe. Now my fire." Miriam appeared from somewhere and spoke 3 words to Dell that Rosalie didn't hear. Dell went back to her stove. Miriam looked at Rosalie. "Come with me," she said. She took her to the back room off the kitchen where the household supplies were stored. She showed her the wood stack, the actual wood stack, which was substantial. She showed her the coal bin. She showed her the oil storage for the lamps. She showed her the pantry, which was full. "This is a working estate," Miriam said. "It keeps provision. You are not using up anyone's share." She paused. "You are allowed to be warm, Miss Mercer. You are allowed to eat from a full pantry. These are not privileges you must ration." Rosalie looked at the full shelves. Something passed across her face that she couldn't control quickly enough. Miriam saw it. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Rosalie said very quietly, "How long until it feels that way?" Miriam was quiet. Then, "Different for everybody. But you'll know it's starting when you stop apologizing for firewood." That afternoon, Silas came to find her. He had been on the North Fields since morning, and he came in carrying the kind of news that doesn't improve with time. His expression had that particular compression. She was learning to read the set of his jaw when something was wrong that he hadn't decided how to handle yet. "Sit down," he said. "I'd rather stand." He looked at her. Something softened fractionally the way it did sometimes when she pushed back. Not irritation, almost like relief. Like a man who expected compliance and found the absence of it interesting. "The tenant on the East Quarter," he said. "Solomon Greer, oldest tenancy on the property. He came to me this morning." He paused. "He says he's been paying his quarterly rent in full, every quarter for 3 years. Rosalie went still. "But the ledger shows him 4 quarters in arrears," she said. "Yes." "Someone collected his payments and didn't enter them." "Yes." "Or entered them somewhere else," she said. "Into a different account, which means there's a second set of records." She was already moving toward the study. "Which means whoever is doing this has been running parallel books." "Rosalie." She stopped. "We don't know yet who it is," he said. "It came out careful, deliberate. I have people I trust on this estate. I need you to be careful," she said. "I know." She turned. "Mr. Blackwood, I spent 4 years in a house where I suspected everyone and could trust no one and had no one to tell about it. I know how to be careful." He held her gaze. "I know you do," he said. And the way he said it, not patronizing, not pitying, just acknowledging, simply acknowledging, made her look away first. She went to the study. She started looking for the second set of books. She found the first trail 3 days later, and it led somewhere she hadn't expected. She had been cross-referencing the shipping manifests with the estate supply receipts, looking for the signature that appeared across the falsified entries. Everyone who falsified records had a signature in how they did it, a habit they repeated without realizing, and she found it. A particular way of rounding numbers. Always down. Always by the same increment. Always in the 3rd column. She had the manifests spread across the study desk when Silas came in, and she looked up and said without preamble, "Who handles the outgoing shipments?" Silas closed the door behind him. "Horace Vale, my estate steward." She turned the manifest to face him and put her finger on the column. She watched his face. What happened there was complicated. She had seen men react to betrayal before Augusta had given her extensive education in what people looked like when they discovered they'd been deceived by someone close. Usually it was hot. Usually it was fast. Usually it was some immediate spill of anger looking for direction. Silas went completely still. The kind of still that wasn't absence of feeling. It was the opposite, too much of it compressed into something that wouldn't fit through the usual exits. "Vale has been with this estate for 7 years, he said. "I know. He knows this land better than anyone alive. I know. That's what made it possible." She kept her voice level. "You'd need that kind of access to do this quietly for this long. He knew exactly where to hide it." Silas pulled a chair out and sat down heavily. He stared at the manifest. "I trusted him," he said. "Not to her. Not really. Just set it into the room with the flat, exhausted quality of a man stating a fact that has just become a wound." Rosalie didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "People who mean to steal from you always make themselves trustworthy first. That's not your failure. That's their method." He looked at her. She looked back. Something shifted between them in that moment. Small tectonic, the kind of shift you don't notice until later when you're trying to locate the exact point where everything changed. "There's more," she said. "Tell me." Vale's not working alone. The shipments go to the same destination each time, a private buyer in Richmond. "I need to see the buyer's records, but I think—" She stopped. "You think what?" "I think someone else is involved. Someone with enough money to absorb the redirected shipments without raising questions." She hesitated. "I need another week with the records before I'm certain." Silas nodded once. "Take the week," he said. He stood. He was almost at the door when Rosalie said, "Mr. Blackwood, you should tell no one we're looking. Not yet. Not until we know all of it." He stopped. "Not even Miriam," he said. "Not even Miriam." He was quiet. "You think it could be anyone," he said. "I think someone has been walking through this estate for years feeling perfectly safe," she said. "I don't want them to stop feeling safe. Not until we're ready." He turned and looked at her for a long moment. "You know," he said, "you are considerably more dangerous than you look." It came out without ornament. No smile, no performance of charm. Just a plain statement from a man who was genuinely revising his understanding of something. Rosalie felt warmth rise in her face and was deeply irritated by it. "I'll take that as a compliment," she said. "It was one," he said. He left. She sat alone with the ledgers and the manifests and the growing shape of something very large and very deliberate, taking form in the numbers before her, and she thought, "Whoever you are, I am going to find every last thing you tried to hide." She had been invisible inside other people's houses for 4 years. Nobody had ever explained to the people who made her invisible that invisible and unobserving are not the same thing. On the 9th day, Rosalie did something she hadn't done in 4 years. She went for a walk. Not to accomplish something. Not to perform a task or gather information or make herself useful in some demonstrable way. She simply walked out the back door of Blackwood House into the late afternoon and went where her feet went. They went to the kitchen garden, which was overgrown but fragrant. Past the garden to the hill behind it, where a stand of oak trees held their shade, and the sound of the creek below came up clear and steady. She sat on a stone wall and did absolutely nothing. It lasted approximately 4 minutes before the discomfort became unbearable. She was sitting there trying to push through it, trying to simply exist in a space without earning the right to it, when she heard the uneven footstep on the grass behind her. She didn't turn. She already knew. Silas sat on the opposite end of the wall, leaving several feet between them, and looked out at the property below. He didn't ask what she was doing. She didn't explain. They sat. "This is the part I don't know how to do," she said after a while. It came out quieter than she'd intended. "Just existing somewhere, without a reason." "You're allowed a reason that is only your own comfort," he said. "I know that intellectually. But not otherwise. Not yet." He was quiet. Then, "I have the same difficulty. Different cause, same result." She looked at him sideways. "You," she said. "Stillness makes me feel like a target," he said simply. "If I stop moving long enough, I start hearing things I'd rather not hear." She turned that over. "From the war," she said. His jaw tightened very slightly. "Mostly." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." He said it without heat. "You didn't do it." They sat in silence for another few minutes. Then, without looking at her, Silas said, "You could learn to walk the land if you wanted. I could show you the property lines." He paused. It was the longest she'd heard him pause before a sentence. "It's easier to be still in a place if you know it belongs to you." Rosalie looked at him. "It doesn't belong to me," she said. "The settlement says otherwise." "On paper." "Paper is where it starts," he said. She looked back out at the land below them. The late light fell across it golden and serious. The oak trees held the shadow. She thought about paper, about the document she'd signed with a hand that didn't shake, about the clauses he'd added before he'd ever met her. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, "can I ask you something direct?" "You always do," he said. And the smallest thing happened at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, but the place where a smile had clearly once been, and might be again. "Why me?" she said. "Augusta had debts. There are women in this county who would have accepted that arrangement without the conditions you added. Women with better families, better prospects. Women who wouldn't have walked into your study 6 days after arriving and told you your steward might be robbing you." She looked at him. "Why did you agree to this particular arrangement?" He was quiet for a moment. The way he got quiet when he was selecting words, not avoiding them. "Because of the letter," he said. She frowned. "What letter?" "Your aunt wrote to 3 men in the county, presenting you as available. The letter described your domestic skills, your appearance, your docility." He paused. "It also mentioned almost in passing that you'd been managing her household accounts for 4 years. Rosalie went cold. She had not known about the letters. "The other 2 men she wrote to," she said slowly, "what did they want?" "Exactly what she described," Silas said. "Someone docile." He looked at her. "I wanted someone who could read a ledger without being told what she was looking for." She stared at him. "You married me," she said, "because of the accounting." "I chose you," he said. The correction was quiet but firm. Because of the accounting, and because of the way she tried to make it sound like a liability rather than an asset. He looked back at the land. A woman who keeps a sinking house afloat for 4 years and is presented to prospective husbands as biddable is a woman being deliberately diminished by someone who depends on her and resents the dependence. He paused. "I've seen that before. I know what it does to a person." Rosalie could not immediately find words. She sat on the stone wall with the creak sound below and the oak shadow above, and the particular silence of someone who has just received information that rearranges a significant portion of what they thought they understood. "You chose me for practical reasons," she said finally. "Among others," he said. She waited. He said nothing else. She filed the "among others" in a place she would return to later, when she had more capacity to think carefully about what it might contain. That evening, the crash happened. She had been helping Dell, who had forgiven her the firewood incident with the efficient finality of a woman who didn't believe in prolonged grievance, carry serving dishes from the kitchen to the dining room, and she was crossing the threshold when her foot caught the edge of the rug and the large ceramic serving tray in her hands tipped and hit the floor. The sound was enormous. Ceramic against hardwood. A crack and a clatter, and fragments skidding in every direction. Her body responded before her mind did. She was down, both arms over her head, shoulders curved in, making herself as small as possible in the corner between the sideboard and the wall protecting the back of her skull. The way you protect the back of your skull when something loud and sudden has happened, and you have learned that loud, sudden things are precursors. She was in that position when she heard the footsteps. Silas came through the dining room door fast, his instincts already moving him toward a problem before his mind had identified the problem, and he stopped in the doorway and saw her. She saw him see her. She was crouched in the corner covering her head over a broken serving dish. His face did something complicated and quiet and devastating in its restraint. He took 1 step forward. She flinched. Her shoulders pulled up harder without any decision to pull them. He stopped. He didn't come closer. He didn't reach for her. He didn't say, "It's just a dish. It's all right. There's nothing to worry about," in the brisk, faintly impatient way of people who believe that naming the absence of danger is the same as removing the feeling of it. He lowered himself, not close, several feet away. He simply folded his large frame down to the floor and sat there putting himself at her level and looked at her. "Look at me," he said. She was struggling to breathe correctly. "Look at me, Rosalie." She lifted her head. Howe was sitting on the dining room floor, with his back against the opposite sideboard, and his long legs in front of him, and his hands flat on the floor where she could see them, and he was looking at her with an expression that had nothing in it she needed to brace against. "No one's angry," he said. She was shaking. She could feel it, fine tremors running through her arms where she'd uncovered her head. "I broke the china," she said. Her voice came out strange, thin. Silas looked at the shattered pieces on the floor. "Then we'll buy more china," he said. 3 words. She had been bracing for the alternative to those 3 words for so long that when they came, they went somewhere very specific. Inside her found something she had barricaded years ago and put their hands against it and pressed. She couldn't answer. He didn't move. He didn't push. He simply sat on the floor of his dining room and waited the way a person waits when they understand that what's happening cannot be rushed and should not be managed. After a while, Rosalie's breathing evened. After a while longer, she uncurled. She sat on the floor with her back against the sideboard, and she looked at the broken china scattered between them, and she thought about every time she had been the one to clean up the evidence of someone else's anger. Every piece of broken thing she had swept up quietly, without being asked to, and without being thanked. She reached out. Her hand moved across the floor toward his. He saw it coming, and he didn't move toward it. He waited. Let her close the distance herself, and when her fingers reached his, he turned his hand over and let her take it. His hand was very large, roughened from outdoor work, warm. She held it, and she didn't cry this time. She had cried over the locked door 3 nights ago, and that had been its own thing, necessary and complete. This was different. This was something settling some turbulent water finding level. After a moment, he said very quietly, "You are safe to be loud in this house." She looked at him. "Dishes break," he said. "Things fall, doors slam, none of it." He stopped. His jaw worked. He was not a man who found this kind of sentence easy, and he was making the effort anyway, and she could see the effort, which was its own thing. None of it is followed by anything you need to be afraid of. In this house. He paused. "I want you to know that. I want it to be not just in your head, eventually." She thought about what Miriam had said about bread in the drawer. Knowing it up here and knowing it here are 2 different things. "It'll take time," she said. "That's fine," he said. "We have time." She let go of his hand after another moment. She pushed herself up off the floor. She looked down at him, still sitting there on the floor of his dining room, without any apparent embarrassment about being on the floor of his dining room, and she thought again that this man was nothing, absolutely nothing like what they'd said. "I'll help clean up," she said. "Leave it for Dell," he said. "I'd rather Rosalie." He stood and standing. He was again enormous and quiet and serious. "Leave it." She left it. She went to her room. She sat at the writing desk and did not work on the ledgers for the first time in 9 days. She sat and she listened to the house settle around her, and she thought about a man who had sat on the floor to put himself at her level and waited for her to choose when to come back. She thought about him saying, "We have time." She had not belonged to a we in 4 years. She was not certain what to do with that. 4 days later, she found what she hadn't wanted to find. She'd been following the buyer records from Richmond, tracking the money that received the falsified shipments, and she'd found a name that connected to the buyer's correspondence. Not Vale's name. Not a Richmond merchant's name. Preston Wycliffe. Wycliffe was the neighboring landowner. Old money, substantial acreage, the kind of man who smiled at county gatherings and maneuvered under the surface of that smile with cold precision. She'd been briefly introduced to him at a social call Miriam had insisted she make with the wife of a neighboring farmer. He'd been charming, thorough about it. She stared at his name in the correspondence for a long time. Then she looked at the totals, and then she found something that made her stomach drop. It wasn't just about theft. The amounts being redirected, the false shipments, the disappeared tenant payments, the manipulated livestock records. They weren't random. They were targeted. Systematic. The kind of systematic that had a goal beyond money. She pulled the land assessment records from the back of the filing cabinet, the ones she'd found tucked away where they shouldn't have been tucked. She spread them on the desk. If Blackwood Ridge appeared insolvent, if the records showed consistent losses year over year, undermanaged and declining, then the estate's creditors could move. Banks could call in debts, and a man with enough money standing by waiting could acquire 4,000 acres of Virginia land at a fraction of their value. This wasn't theft. This was a slow, deliberate campaign to take everything Silas Blackwood had. She sat very still. She needed to tell him tonight. All of it. She needed to lay out what she'd found and what it meant, and she needed to do it carefully, Because the look on his face when she'd told him about Vale, that compressed, devastated stillness, was going to be worse this time. Because this time, the scale of it was monstrous. She was still sitting with the land records in her hands when she heard the knock at the study door. "Come in," she said. Miriam appeared. Her expression was the one she wore when something had arrived that she disapproved of. "There's a carriage at the door," Miriam said. "Miss Mercer." She paused. "It's your aunt." The land records went cold in Rosalie's hands. She looked at Miriam. "What does she want?" "She says she has information about documents that went missing from Bellamy House." Miriam's voice was flat and careful. "Documents and money both." Rosalie set the records down. She pressed her hands flat on the desk. "She says," Miriam continued, "that you took them before you left." The room was very quiet. Rosalie thought about the shipping records, the falsified manifests, the correspondence connecting Vale to Wycliffe, the land assessment documents tucked where they shouldn't have been. She thought about her aunt's signature, which she had seen once in the buyer's correspondence briefly, peripherally, in a way she hadn't yet let herself fully examine. And she understood with a sudden cold clarity what Augusta had come here to do. She had come to make Rosalie disappear before Rosalie could make her visible. She stood up. "Where is Mr. Blackwood?" she said. "Front hall," Miriam said. "With her." "How long has she been speaking to him?" 3 minutes. Rosalie walked out of the study and down the corridor toward the front of the house, and she did not slow down, and she did not touch her hair, and she did not compose her expression into anything apologetic or diminished. For the first time in 4 years, someone was about to tell lies about her to someone who mattered. And for the first time in 4 years, she intended to be in the room when it happened. She was done being the story other people told about her. She was done entirely. Augusta Bellamy stood in the front hall of Blackwood House like she owned it. That was the first thing Rosalie noticed. Not her aunt's expression, not the travel dust on her skirts, not even Silas standing 6 feet away with his arms at his sides and his jaw set in that particular way that meant he was choosing very deliberately not to speak yet. What she noticed was the posture. The way Augusta had arranged herself in the center of the hall, the way she arranged herself in every room she entered, as if the room had been built for the purpose of containing her and everything else in it was incidental. Rosalie stopped in the corridor doorway. Augusta saw her. Something moved behind her aunt's eyes as fast calculated the rapid assessment of a woman who had walked into a confrontation and was already adjusting her approach based on what she found there. "Rosalie," Augusta said. Her voice was warm. It was the particular warmth of something carefully constructed. "I'm relieved to see you well." "Augusta," Rosalie said, "I've just been explaining to Mr. Blackwood." "I heard what you've been explaining," Rosalie said. "I heard it from Miriam. I'd like to hear it directly from you." Augusta's chin lifted very slightly. "Then I'll say it plainly. Several documents went missing from Bellamy House in the days before you left. Personal correspondence, financial records. I believe you took them." "Why would I take your documents?" "I don't know your reasons," Augusta said. "I know the documents are gone, and you are the only person who had access to them." Rosalie looked at her aunt. 4 years of living inside this woman's orbit had taught her to read Augusta Bellamy the way a navigator reads weather, not the surface but the pressure underneath, the angle of the wind behind the words. She was scared. Augusta was scared, and Rosalie had never in 4 years seen Augusta scared, and that fear made her more dangerous than anything else in this room. "What correspondence?" Rosalie said. "Be specific." "Letters," Augusta said. "Business correspondence, private matters." "With whom?" "That is not your concern." "If you're accusing me of theft," Rosalie said, "the contents of what I supposedly stole are very much my concern." Silas had not moved. He was watching this exchange with his arms still at his sides and his expression doing that thing. It did that deliberate compression, holding everything internal, giving nothing away to the room. But his eyes had moved from Augusta to Rosalie and stayed there, and she knew he was reading every word of what wasn't being said. Augusta turned to him. She pivoted with the elegant efficiency of a woman who understood that an audience with power was never wasted. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, and her voice shifted register softer now, more sorrowful, the voice she used when she needed a man to feel that she was confiding something painful. I want to speak to you plainly as someone who has Rosalie's genuine interests at heart. Rosalie's jaw tightened. My niece has had difficulties, Augusta continued. Since her parents' deaths, she has been troubled, unstable at times. There have been incidents at Bellamy House, accusations she made against members of my staff, records she claimed to have found, stories she told to creditors. Those stories kept your creditors from seizing this house, Rosalie said, and I fear, Augusta pressed on, that she has brought those same instabilities here, that she has perhaps presented Mr. Blackwood with a version of events that casts herself as more capable, more reliable than she truly. That's enough, Silas said. Augusta stopped. His voice hadn't risen. It hadn't needed to. It landed in the room with the particular weight of a man who had been quiet for a long time and was now choosing not to be, and the distinction was immediately clear to everyone present. Mrs. Bellamy, he said, I have been listening to you for 7 minutes. I've heard that my wife took documents. I've heard that she is unstable. I've heard that she is unreliable. He paused. I have not heard a single specific thing she actually did. Augusta opened her mouth. I have, however, he continued, spent the last 2 weeks watching your niece go through 11 years of estate records and find what 3 different accountants missed. He looked at Augusta with the flat gray directness that Rosalie was beginning to understand was his version of fury, not heat, but absolute zero. So I am going to ask you one more time to be specific. And if you cannot be specific, I'm going to ask you to leave my property. Augusta looked at him. Then she looked at Rosalie. And Rosalie saw it happen. The calculation completing the decision made the shift from sorrow to something sharper. Very well, Augusta said. Specifically, your wife has been building a case against people connected to my household, making accusations about financial arrangements that are entirely legal and entirely private. She has taken documents that could be used to damage the reputations of respectable members of this community. She reached into the bag she was carrying. And I have here a ledger, the Blackwood Ridge account ledger for 1815, which I recovered from Rosalie's room at Bellamy House the morning after she left. She placed it on the hall table. The room went completely still. Rosalie stared at the ledger. She recognized the binding, the particular wear on the spine, the water stain on the lower left corner. That was a Blackwood Ridge ledger. She had not taken it. She had never seen it outside the study filing cabinet, which meant someone had removed it from this house and placed it at Bellamy House, and Augusta had brought it here, and the timing of that, the precision of it, told her exactly how frightened her aunt truly was. That ledger, Augusta said, contains entries that appear to have been altered, dates changed, amounts falsified, and my niece's fingerprints, metaphorically speaking, are on every page. She looked at Silas. I came here because I was concerned for you, Mr. Blackwood, not for myself, because I believed you deserved to know who you had married. Silas looked at the ledger on the table. He didn't touch it. He looked at Rosalie. She looked back. 1 second. 2. The space between them across the hallway was 10 feet and 400 pounds of accusation and the specific weight of a question he was not asking out loud. I didn't take it, she said, and I didn't alter it. 1 more second. I know, he said. Augusta blinked. Mr. Blackwood, I know she didn't take it, he said, because I know where that ledger was 3 days ago, and it wasn't at Bellamy House. He looked at Augusta with that flat gray precision. Someone removed it from my filing cabinet. Someone who had access to this property. He paused. That's not an accusation against my wife. That's a question about who else has been inside my study. Rosalie's breath came back. She hadn't known she'd been holding it until it returned. Augusta's composure developed its first visible fracture. Small, fast, immediately controlled. But Rosalie had been watching her aunt's face for 4 years, and she caught it. I think, Rosalie said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt, that we should discuss the Richmond correspondence. Augusta went very still. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Augusta said, I don't know what you mean. I think you do, Rosalie said. I found your name in buyer's correspondence that connects to Blackwood Ridge shipments. Not prominently, almost a footnote, but it's there. That is absurd. It's documented. You fabricated Augusta. Rosalie said her aunt's name the way her aunt had always said hers, flat, quiet, certain. I have been watching you manage debt and deception for 4 years. I know how you think. I know what it looks like when you're involved in something and what it looks like when you're only adjacent to it. She paused. You didn't orchestrate this. You're not the kind of risk-taker who builds something this complicated. But you knew about it. And you took money for knowing about it and staying quiet. Augusta's mouth thinned. You have no proof of anything. I have the correspondence. Correspondence can be interpreted many ways. Not this correspondence, Rosalie said. Not with the amount and the date and the signature that's on it. She kept her voice level. I wasn't going to use it against you. I want you to know that. I was trying to understand the full shape of what was happening here, and your name was part of the shape, but I wasn't. Oh, spare me your magnanimity, Augusta said, and the warmth was entirely gone. Now the performance stripped back to the thing underneath which was cold and precise and cornered. You have always believed yourself morally superior to this family. Your mother was the same, insufferably certain of her own virtue, while the rest of us managed reality. My mother, Rosalie said quietly, managed reality just fine. She just refused to do it by selling people. Something passed across Augusta's face that was old and complicated and might in a different life have been grief. It didn't last. Mr. Blackwood, Augusta said, turning back to him with her composure rebuilt. This ledger, Mrs. Bellamy. Silas moved for the first time since Rosalie had entered the hall. He crossed to the hall table and picked up the ledger. He opened it. He looked at several pages. These entries were altered. You're right about that. Augusta straightened. Something like triumph began to form. But these alterations, Silas continued, were made recently. The ink is different. I know this ledger. I have used this ledger. The entries for 1815 were made in iron gall. Whatever was added to these pages was not. He looked at Augusta. Whoever altered this ledger did it this week, not 3 years ago. Augusta said nothing. Which means, Silas said, that someone prepared this ledger specifically for this visit. Someone who knew you were coming and what you intended to say and needed physical evidence to support it. He set the ledger down. Which means either you prepared it, Mrs. Bellamy, or the person who sent you here did. The hall was very quiet. Rosalie watched her aunt. She watched the woman who had been her jailer and her creditor and her only remaining family stand in the hallway of a stranger's house and calculate the distance between where she was and every possible exit. I want you to leave, Silas said. It wasn't angry. It was simply done. I want you to take your carriage and go back to Albemarle County. And I want you to think very carefully about what you put your name to and who you allowed to use you. He paused. Because the full picture of what has been happening on this estate is going to come out. And when it does, the people whose names are in those records are going to be accountable for them. What your degree of accountability looks like will depend on how much you cooperate between now and then. Augusta looked at him, then at Rosalie. You think he'll protect you, she said softly. You think because he says the right things now, because he's decent to you now. I think, Rosalie said, that I can protect myself. That's new. But that's what I think. Augusta picked up her bag. She walked to the front door. She stopped with her hand on it. Your mother would be proud of you, she said without turning. She was always stubborn too. It never did her much good. She left. The door closed. The hall was very quiet for a moment. Then Miriam appeared from the corridor with the expression of a woman who had been listening from around a corner and had absolutely no intention of apologizing for it. Dell has supper ready, she said with enormous dignity. Silas looked at her. Were you there the whole time? He said. I was in the vicinity, Miriam said. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Right. Rosalie looked at the closed front door. She felt the shake starting in her hands, the delayed physical response to the adrenaline she'd held compressed through the entire confrontation. She pressed her palms flat against her skirt. Silas saw it. He said nothing. He simply fell into step beside her as they walked toward the dining room, not touching, not commenting, just present. Like a man who understood that sometimes the most useful thing you can do for another person is simply be in the room with them while they come back to themselves. She was grateful for that. She was frightened by how grateful she was. They didn't eat much at supper. Rosalie pushed food around her plate and ran calculations in her head, what Augusta's visit meant, what the altered ledger meant, what the precision of the timing meant. And Silas watched her and did not interrupt, which she was also grateful for, and eventually she put her fork down and said, "Wycliffe sent her." Silas looked up. "He knew I was getting close," she said. "He knew I was working through the records. Someone told him. Someone in this house." She kept her voice level, but something in it must have given her away, because Silas set down his own fork. "Not Miriam," he said. "No, not Miriam." She had already decided that. "Vale. Vale has been off the property for 10 days. He has associates," she said. "People on the estate who report to him without knowing they're reporting to him. And Wycliffe got word that I was close, and he sent Augusta, because Augusta was already compromised, because her name was in his records, and he knew it, and he's been holding it over her probably for months." She looked at Silas. "He used her. He pointed her at me like a weapon, and hoped the accusation would be enough to discredit what I'd found." Silas was very still. "How close are you," he said, "to having all of it?" "I have most of it," she said. "Enough to show the pattern. Enough to connect Vale to Wycliffe through 3 separate document trails." She hesitated. "But the ledger, the real ledger, the one that shows the complete extent of what they diverted, it's the one Augusta brought. The one they altered." "They altered the evidence," he said. "Yes, which is brilliant, and also a mistake, because altering evidence means destroying what was actually on those pages." She leaned forward. "But I had already transcribed those pages. 10 days ago when she said. "I learned that in Augusta's house. The moment you find something important, you duplicate it, because important things have a habit of disappearing." He looked at her for a long moment. "Where are the copies?" he said. "Somewhere that isn't the study," she said. "Somewhere that the person who moved the ledger off this property won't think to look." "Where?" She held his gaze. "The back of the wardrobe. Under the bread." He blinked. "Under the—" He stopped. "The bread Miriam mentioned. I keep copies of important documents under the bread," she said. "No one looks there." Something happened in Silas Blackwood's face that she had not seen there before. It moved across his features like light across water, complicated, layered there and gone, before she could fully read it. She thought it might have been the closest thing to delighted she had ever seen on a man who had apparently forgotten how to be delighted. "Right," he said. "We need to move carefully now," she said, because she did not trust herself to continue looking at whatever that was on his face. "We know what we have. We need witnesses. We need to present this in front of people Wycliffe can't threaten or buy, and we need to do it before he realizes the ledger didn't work." "How long do we have?" "Days," she said. "Maybe less. When Augusta reports back that it failed." "He'll move," Silas said. "He'll try something else." "Yes. Then we move first," he said. She nodded. "I'll send for Justice Aldrich tomorrow," Silas said. "He's 3 counties over, and Wycliffe has no hold on him. We'll request a formal examination." He paused. "I'll also contact the tenants, Greer and the others, if they're willing to give statements about their missing payments." "They will be," Rosalie said. "I've spoken to Dell. She's connected to the tenant families. From what she's told me, they've been angry about this for 2 years. They believed you were cheating them. They'll want to be heard." Silas went very still at that. "They thought I was cheating them," he said. "Yes." 2 years. "Yes." She watched him absorb that the knowledge that the people who worked his land had spent 2 years believing he was the one stealing from them. That the damage Wycliffe and Vale had done wasn't only financial. It had eaten into something between him and the people on this property, something that took years to build and could be destroyed by a pattern of missing payments that looked from the outside like the choices of a dishonest man. His jaw set. "All right," he said. Quiet. Certain. The voice of a man who has found the specific point of the problem and is now entirely focused on it. We move tomorrow. They moved tomorrow. Silas sent 3 separate riders out at dawn, 1 to Justice Aldrich, 1 to 2 neighboring landowners. He trusted 1 to a lawyer in Richmond who had handled his affairs for 15 years. Rosalie spent the morning organizing every piece of documentation she had into a sequence that could be followed by someone who hadn't spent 2 weeks building it, setting out the case in the order that would be clearest to a stranger. Miriam brought coffee every 90 minutes without being asked. At 2 in the afternoon, Horace Vale arrived at the front door. Rosalie was in the study when Miriam appeared. "Mr. Vale is here," Miriam said. Her voice was flat. "He says he wants to speak to Mr. Blackwood about the estate accounts. He says he heard there were some concerns." Rosalie looked up. "He heard?" she said. "That's what he says." She looked at the documents spread on the desk. "Where is Mr. Blackwood?" "Northfield. He can be back in 20 minutes. "Keep Vale in the front room," Rosalie said. "Don't let him near the study." She was already stacking the documents into ordered piles. "And Miriam." "I won't leave him alone in any room," Miriam said. "Not for a moment." Rosalie nodded. She secured the documents in the desk drawer and locked it and put the key in her pocket, and then went to stand in the doorway of the front room and looked at Horace Vale. How was a well-made man. 50, perhaps. The kind of person whose handsomeness had settled with age into something that read as distinguished silver-touched hair. A jacket that fit precisely an expression of open and slightly concerned reasonableness that had clearly served him well across many years of looking reasonable while doing unreasonable things. He looked at her, the way men like him always looked at women like her, with the particular courtesy that is also a dismissal, the polished surface of respect that conceals the assumption of insignificance. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, "I wonder if I might wait for Silas." "Mr. Blackwood will be back shortly," she said. "Can I ask what brings you?" "Estate matters," he said pleasantly. "Nothing to concern yourself with." She looked at him. "Mr. Vale," she said, "I have been working through the estate accounts for 2 weeks. I have a fairly complete picture of the estate's concerns." She paused. "I think you should know that before Mr. Blackwood returns." Something moved through his pleasant expression. Too fast to name. There and gone. "I see," he said. "And have you found anything of interest?" "Quite a lot," she said. He looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time since she'd entered the room, the thorough reassessment of a man who had been operating on one assumption and is rapidly replacing it with another. "You're more thorough than I expected," he said, still pleasant. The pleasantness of a man keeping his options open. "Most people are," she said, "when no one's watching." He smiled. It didn't reach anything. "Whatever you think you found," he said, "I want you to understand that figures can be interpreted many ways, and that a woman with no formal training in estate management, interpreting records, she didn't create in a household, she entered 2 weeks ago." He let that sit. A justice would want to be very certain of her credibility before proceeding. There it was. She had known it was coming. She had known it the moment she decided to stand in this doorway and let him see her face. "Yes," she said, "he would." She held his gaze. "Which is why I'm glad that what I have isn't an interpretation, it's documentation. Specifically 3 parallel shipping manifests, tenant payment records with corresponding bank deposits that don't match, and correspondence between yourself and Preston Wycliffe going back to 1815. She tilted her head slightly. "Would you like to discuss interpretation now, or would you prefer to wait for Mr. Blackwood?" Vale was very still. The pleasantness was entirely gone. What was underneath it was colder and more honest. "You have no idea," he said quietly, "what you've stepped into." "I have an excellent idea," she said. "I've been in it for 2 weeks." She heard the horses outside. She heard the front door. She heard Silas's voice speaking to Miriam in the hallway, and she heard the change in it when Miriam told him who was in the front room, the particular shift from normal to focused that happened in him when something required focus. He came through the door. He took in the room, Rosalie standing, Vale seated, the specific quality of the silence between them in approximately 2 seconds. "Horace," he said. "Silas." Vale stood. He was working on reassembling the pleasantness, and it wasn't quite coming back together the way he wanted it. "I came to discuss the account concerns. I understand there's been some confusion." "There's no confusion," Silas said. He looked at Rosalie. She gave him one small nod. He looked back at Vale. "There's fraud. You know that, and I know that. And the only question is how we proceed from here." Vale looked at him for a long moment. Then he said something Rosalie had not expected. "I needed the money," he said. The pleasantness collapsed entirely. What came through was old and tired and genuinely exhausted. The voice of a man who had been maintaining a lie for years and found in this moment that he was simply too tired to maintain it. "I had debts, personal debts, the kind you can't explain to your employer. And Wycliffe came to me 8 years ago with a proposition, and I told myself it was temporary." He looked at Silas. "I told myself I'd stop when the debts were clear." "But the debts were never clear," Silas said. "No," Vale said. "They never were." Rosalie watched Silas. She watched a man look at someone who had been his trusted steward for 7 years. Someone who had worked beside him, known his land, shared dinners and difficult seasons, and the complicated intimacy of two people building something together, and discover that the foundation of that trust had been rotten from very early on. His face did not crack. She didn't expect it to. What she saw was subtler, a settling, a very deep and quiet thing, like watching a house absorb the loss of something structural and hold itself together through the sheer habit of having been solid for a long time. "Wycliffe," Silas said. "He approached you." "He knew about my debts," Vale said. "He had information, things I couldn't afford to have made public." He stopped. "He didn't give me a choice. I know that's not an excuse." "No," Silas said. "It's not." "He's trying to take your land," Vale said. "I don't think you understand how completely—" "We understand," Rosalie said. Vale looked at her. And the look on his face complex, ashamed, the specific expression of a man seeing too late that the person he had underestimated was the one who had found him, was something she would remember for a long time. "Will you give a statement?" Silas asked. "To the justice. Everything. Wycliffe, the arrangement, the amounts, the method." Vale was quiet. "If I do," he said, "Wycliffe will—" "Wycliffe's leverage over you ends when you speak first," Rosalie said. "Whatever he's been holding over you, once it's in a justice's record, he can't weaponize it anymore. You lose the thing you've been protecting, yes, but you also lose the chain." Vale looked at her. "You've thought about this," he said. "I've thought about a lot of things," she said. "I've had time." He looked at Silas. "I'll give the statement," he said. Justice Aldrich arrived 2 days later. He was a spare, serious man of 60 who had been a justice in Virginia for 30 years and who had, in Silas's assessment, the rare and valuable quality of being genuinely unimpressed by money. He arrived with a clerk and a formal manner, and he sat at the dining room table, and he listened. Vale spoke first. He spoke for 2 hours. He laid out the full arrangement. The beginning 8 years back, when Wycliffe had approached him with a proposition and a threat in the same breath. The method: redirect shipments, alter records, manipulate tenant accounts, make Blackwood Ridge appear to be declining steadily under its own mismanagement. The goal: wait until the estate's credit position became untenable, then move on the land when Silas was forced to sell. The clerk wrote everything. Justice Aldrich asked precise, quiet questions. Then Rosalie presented the documentation. She had organized it into a sequence: shipping manifests first, then tenant records, then the banking correspondence, then the letters between Vale and Wycliffe that she'd found in the 3rd week of searching, tucked inside a false bottom in the filing cabinet that she'd found because she'd noticed the exterior depth didn't match the interior. The justice examined each piece. He asked her questions. Direct technical questions about what she'd found and how and what her interpretation of it was, and she answered each one with the same direct precision she brought to everything. At no point did he ask her to clarify her credentials or suggest that a man might be better placed to explain the accounts. She noticed that. She noticed it the way you notice the absence of an expected pain, with a small, sharp relief that tells you how much you'd been bracing. And then Augusta arrived. She came with Preston Wycliffe. That was the twist none of them had anticipated. Not Silas, not Rosalie, not Justice Aldrich, who looked up from his documents when Miriam announced 2 additional visitors with the expression of a man recalibrating. They came into the dining room together. Wycliffe first, with his old money confidence and his politician smile, and Augusta behind him. And the moment Rosalie saw them together, saw the way Augusta stayed just slightly behind and to the left, the subordinate position, the position of someone who has handed power to another person and is now at their mercy, she understood completely how this had worked. Wycliffe had owned Augusta the same way he'd owned Vale. Different currency, same method. Justice Aldrich, Wycliffe said. I'm glad I arrived before any decisions were made. I believe there is significant context that is being omitted from whatever you've been told. Mr. Wycliffe, the justice said, you're welcome to make a statement. I intend to. He set a leather document case on the table. I have here the Blackwood Ridge estate ledger for 1815, which was recently recovered by Mrs. Bellamy, showing systematic falsification of accounts by the current Mrs. Blackwood, who had access to all estate records, and who I believe has been manipulating those records to conceal her own. That ledger, Rosalie said, was removed from this property, altered with commercial ink that wasn't available in this county until 4 months ago, and returned by my aunt in an attempt to discredit the documentation I've already presented to Justice Aldrich. Wycliffe turned to look at her. He had the presence of a man entirely accustomed to dominating rooms, and for one moment, the full force of that presence turned on her. The assessment, the cold calculation, the rapid and contemptuous evaluation. I'm sorry, he said pleasantly. And you are? I'm the woman who spent 2 weeks finding every document you thought was hidden, she said. The room was very quiet. Wycliffe set his case down. Justice Aldrich, he said, I would ask that you consider the source of these allegations, a woman with no legal standing in estate management, no formal credentials, who has been in this household for less than a month. She has produced documentation, the justice said. I have read it. The question of credentials is separate from the question of accuracy. He looked at Wycliffe. Are you disputing the accuracy of the documents? Wycliffe paused. I am disputing their interpretation, he said. Then let's discuss interpretation, Rosalie said. She turned to the clerk. The shipping manifest from September 14th, 1817. The entry showing 60 casks received, and the corresponding entry 6 weeks earlier, showing the same 60 casks already received. She looked at Wycliffe. How would you interpret the same 60 casks arriving twice? Clerical error, he said. Across 47 separate entries over 3 years. Systemic clerical error. In the same handwriting, she said. Mr. Vale's handwriting, which Mr. Vale has identified as his own in his statement this morning. Wycliffe looked at Vale. Vale looked at the table, and Rosalie watched Preston Wycliffe, this man with his old money and his politician's smile and his long, patient, calculated campaign to take 4,000 acres of Virginia land from a man he had correctly identified as too proud to ask for help. She watched him look at the clerk who was writing everything, and at the justice who was reading everything, and at the walls of documentation she had built over 2 weeks with her bread in the back of the wardrobe and her copies made before anything could disappear, and she watched him understand that it was over. He turned to Augusta. You told me she was manageable, he said. Augusta said nothing. She looked at her hands. You told me she was nothing, he said. There was no pleasantness left at all. You told me she was... I was wrong, Augusta said very quietly. The room was silent. Rosalie looked at her aunt. Augusta was looking at the table, not at her. She was not a woman built for the particular admission she had just made. I was wrong, and it had cost her something visible to say it. Rosalie did not feel satisfied by this. She did not feel vindicated in the way she'd expected. She felt tired. She felt tired in the specific way of someone who has been fighting for so long that winning still feels like exertion. Mr. Wycliffe, Justice Aldrich said, I have enough here to issue a writ for examination. I would advise you strongly to consider the advantages of cooperation over the alternatives. He looked at Augusta. Mrs. Bellamy, I will need your statement as well when you are ready. Augusta nodded. She didn't look up. Silas stood at the far end of the table, and he hadn't spoken in 20 minutes because he hadn't needed to, because Rosalie had carried it, had built the case and presented it, and stood in front of Wycliffe's contempt and not moved. And he was watching her now with something in his face she didn't have the capacity to read at this particular moment. She would read it later. For now, she set her last document on the justice's table, and she straightened her spine, and she breathed. Wycliffe had called her nothing. Augusta had agreed with him, and the evidence she'd built in a wardrobe with bread in the back of it had just taken them both apart. She was so tired. But she was standing. She was for the first time in 4 years completely and unambiguously standing. The hearing took 3 days. Justice Aldrich was thorough in the way that only men who have seen enough dishonesty to stop being surprised by it can be thorough, methodical, unhurried, missing nothing. He interviewed Vale at length. He interviewed Solomon Greer and 2 other tenant farmers who came to Blackwood House with their payment records tucked carefully under their arms, and the particular dignity of men who had been waiting 2 years to say what they knew. He interviewed Miriam, who answered every question with 1 sentence, more than was strictly necessary, and 1 sentence fewer than she clearly wanted to give. He interviewed Rosalie for 4 hours on the second day. She sat across from him at the dining room table with her copied documents arranged in front of her, and she answered everything he asked with the same precise, unembellished accuracy she'd brought to the original investigation. No theater. No emotion performed for the room. Just the facts in sequence, the documents, in order, the connections she'd found, and what they meant. At the end of the 4 hours, Aldrich set down his pen. Mrs. Blackwood, he said. How long have you been working accounts? 4 years formally, she said. Informally since I was 14. My father kept me beside him when he did the farm records. He believed women should understand money. He was correct, Aldrich said. He gathered his papers. I will say for the record that the quality of this documentation is equal to anything I have seen from trained professionals. He paused. Your father would be proud. She had not cried through any of the proceedings. She came close then. She pressed her hands flat on the table and breathed until the pressure behind her eyes passed, and then she said, Thank you, sir, in a voice that was steady enough. Wycliffe's formal examination was issued before the end of the week. His assets were frozen pending investigation. The scheme as it unraveled in Aldrich's careful hands turned out to be larger than even Rosalie had fully mapped. 3 other estates in the county had been subject to similar methods, 2 of them already sold to Wycliffe at the depressed prices he'd engineered. Those landowners, when contacted, had stories that followed the same shape, the same pattern, the same cold, patient, deliberate campaign of manufactured failure. Wycliffe had not in the end been a man of exceptional brilliance. He had simply been a man willing to take a very long time doing something very ugly, relying on the assumption that the people he targeted would never look carefully enough at their own records to find him. He had not anticipated Rosalie. Vale cooperated fully. His cooperation did not erase what he had done, and Silas did not pretend that it did, but it accelerated the justice's ability to document everything, and Vale seemed to carry his full cooperation with the exhausted relief of a man who had been holding something enormous for years, and was grateful finally to set it down, regardless of the consequences. Augusta gave her statement on the 3rd morning. She sat across from Justice Aldrich, with her hands folded and her back very straight, and she answered his questions in the precise, modulated voice of a woman who had spent decades learning to present herself as composed, regardless of what was happening underneath. She confirmed what Rosalie had said about the correspondence. She confirmed the amount she had received for her silence. She confirmed that Wycliffe had leveraged her existing debts to ensure her cooperation. She did not look at Rosalie during any of it. When she was done, she stood and she collected her things and she walked to the door of the dining room, and then she stopped. She didn't turn around. I told myself, Augusta said, that I was being practical, that someone had to be. A pause. Your mother never forgave me for being practical. The room was very still. She might have, Rosalie said quietly. if the practicality hadn't cost other people so much. Augusta left. Rosalie sat alone in the dining room for a few minutes after. She thought about her mother, about the woman she barely remembered. Warm hands, a particular laugh, a stubbornness that Rosalie apparently inherited, and she thought about the 4 years she'd spent in Augusta's house being diminished into something manageable, and she thought that her mother would have walked into that hallway much sooner and much louder than Rosalie had. But her mother had also had someone who stood beside her. Rosalie was beginning to understand for the first time what that might feel like. The week after the hearing was the strangest of Rosalie's life, not because of the practical changes, though there were many. Vale's replacement was a careful, deliberate man named Forrest, whom Silas had known for years and trusted with the kind of simple earned trust that comes from watching a person make boring, consistent, honest decisions over a long period of time. The tenant agreements were reviewed and corrected back payments, calculated and arranged. Solomon Greer shook Silas's hand on the east field one morning and said, "I knew it wasn't you," in a voice rough with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite forgiveness, but was somewhere honest between them. And Silas said, "I know, I'm sorry it took this long to prove it." And that was that brief and sufficient and real in the way that only very few things are. The estate began to function the way Rosalie had suspected it could. Clearly. Cleanly. Without the hidden hemorrhage of 7 years of systematic theft. The numbers, when honest, told a different story than the ones Vale had constructed. Blackwood Ridge was not only solvent, it was by any reasonable measure thriving. The land was good. The tenants were capable. The infrastructure Silas had built over 15 years was solid and sensible, and had simply been surrounded by manufactured fog. The fog was gone. And in the strange clarity that followed, something shifted. Something shifted between Rosalie and Silas, and she felt it happening, and she couldn't stop it, and she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to. They still worked together every evening. Old habit now comfortable in the specific way that shared routine becomes comfortable, not exciting, not dramatic, just real. He still asked direct questions, and she still gave direct answers. He still made sure she ate when she got absorbed in the accounts. She still noticed when he'd been on the land too long, and came back moving stiffly from the old injury in his leg, and said nothing about it, but set his chair slightly closer to the fireplace without comment. Small things. Except they weren't small. She knew they weren't small. She had lived long enough inside other people's houses to understand that the small things were the whole thing, that what a person actually was could be read entirely in the small things, and that the large gestures meant almost nothing by comparison. He never once asked her what she intended to do. He never asked if she was satisfied with the arrangement. Never asked what she wanted from their life at Blackwood Ridge. Never sat across the desk from her and waited for her to perform gratitude or contentment or whatever it was he might have been entitled to expect from a woman who had come to his house under difficult circumstances and found it better than anticipated. He simply included her. In the work, in the decisions, in the small daily negotiations of running a large property. Her opinions were asked and considered, and sometimes disagreed with, and sometimes adopted, and in either case, they were treated as the opinions of someone whose intelligence was a given, rather than a pleasant surprise. She kept waiting for the conditions to appear. They never did. And that the absence of conditions, the simple sustained absence of the price tag she kept expecting to find, was what began to genuinely frighten her. 3 weeks after the hearing on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Rosalie found the documents on the study desk. She had come in early as she usually did, with the intention of finishing the corrected tenant payment schedule she'd been working through the previous evening. Silas had already been on the land for an hour. The desk was clear except for 3 items placed neatly in the center. A legal document. A letter. A small brass key she didn't recognize. She looked at the key first. Then she picked up the legal document and read it. It took her 3 readings to fully understand what she was looking at. An independent financial settlement. Her name. An amount substantial more than she had expected. More than Augusta had received for her entire cooperation with Wycliffe. Settled in a separate account in her name alone. Not connected to Blackwood Ridge. Not contingent on anything. Simply hers. She picked up the letter. It was in Silas's handwriting, which was blunt and efficient and occasionally difficult to read, and it said, "Rosalie, the enclosed settlement is yours, regardless of any decision you make. I have also arranged transportation if you want it to Richmond or beyond." The second document is a transfer of the bank account to your sole ownership. The key is to the strongbox where those funds are held. No conditions attached to any of this. S. Blackwood. She read it twice. Then she put it down. She sat very still in the study chair, and she looked out the window at the land she had spent 6 weeks learning at the fields. She could now name at the oak tree on the hill where she had sat on a stone wall and talked about stillness with a man who understood what it cost to be still. She felt something break in her chest. Not painfully. It was the sensation of something that had been held very tight for a very long time finally releasing, a loosening deep in the structure of something, a giving way that felt less like damage and more like the end of damage. He was letting her go, after everything. After the ledgers and the bread in the wardrobe and the broken china on the floor and his hand on the floor with its palm turned up and the 4 hours in front of Justice Aldrich and Vale's confession and Wycliffe's unraveling and Augusta saying, "I was wrong," in a voice that cost her everything. He was letting her go. She pressed her hand flat over the letter. She thought, this is the most frightening thing he has ever done, because it would have been easy to stay for the wrong reasons. She could see that clearly now. She could have stayed for security, for comfort, for the simple practical fact that Blackwood House was better than any alternative she had previously had access to. She could have built a life out of gratitude and called it contentment, and it might have been fine. It might have been adequate. It might have looked from the outside like happiness. He had just made that impossible, because now if she stayed, it couldn't be for any of those reasons. It could only be for one. She heard him come in at noon. She heard his footsteps in the hallway, that slight hitch, that imperfect healed rhythm. She would recognize anywhere now. And she heard him stop outside the study door, and she heard the pause where he was deciding whether to knock. He knocked. "Come in," she said. He opened the door. He looked at the documents on the desk. At her face. At the letter which she had clearly read, which she had set down in the particular way a person sets something down that has unsettled them completely. He came in, and he didn't sit. He stood on his side of the desk, and he looked at her, and he waited. She looked at him. "You're sending me away," she said. "No," he said. "I'm making it possible for you to go if you want to go. Those are different things. Not to me. Right now, they feel the same." His jaw tightened. He looked at the window. She watched him find the words, that deliberate internal search she'd come to recognize as characteristic, the working out of what he meant before he said it. "Your aunt made staying with her the price of survival," he said. "I will not make staying with me the price of security." He looked back at her. "That money is yours whether you are at this desk tomorrow morning or in Richmond by Friday. The settlement doesn't change. He stopped, started again. "My regard for you doesn't change." "Your regard," she said. "Yes." She looked at him. "Silas," she said. His name. Just his name without the formality. The first time she had said it like that. He went very still. "What do you want?" she said. "Not what you've arranged for me to be able to do. Not what you've made possible. What do you actually want?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I want you to choose," he said. "Freely, without obligation." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her. Gray eyes absolutely direct. "I want you to stay," he said. He stopped. His hand came up briefly and then dropped, a rare gesture of something uncontrolled. "I want you at this desk tomorrow morning and the morning after that. I want to keep arguing with you about the East Field drainage, because you're right about it, and I don't like admitting that. I want—" He stopped again. His voice had gone rough in a way she hadn't heard before. "I want the thing I have no right to want from a woman who arrived here under the circumstances you arrived under." She stood up. She came around the desk. She stood in front of him, all 6 feet, and more of him, the scar and the size and the quietness that she had spent 6 weeks learning to read, and she looked up at him. "Tell me," she said. "Rosalie, tell me." He looked at her for a long time. "I love you," he said. Quiet. Plain. The way he said everything that mattered without ornament, without performance. Because the ornament would have been dishonest, and dishonesty cost him something he wouldn't pay. "I have been trying not to tell you for 3 weeks because it isn't fair because you came here without a choice and I can't." He stopped. "I won't use that to keep you." She looked at him. Something in her chest was very full. "You are the most infuriatingly principled man I have ever met in my life," she said. His expression did something complicated. "I'll take that as a compliment," he said. He was clearly quoting her. She heard it. "It was one," she said. She reached up. She put her hand on his face. The scarred side. The side he turned away from guests and social gatherings and the county's judgment. She put her palm flat against it, the way you put your palm against something you want to actually know, not touch the surface of, but know. He went very still. Not the controlled stillness he used for hard conversations. Something else. The stillness of a man who has been bracing for something to stop and finds to his profound shock that it is not stopping. "I need to think," she said. "I know," he said. "I need time, to be certain, to know it's the right choice and not just, take whatever time you need," he said. And she heard the cost in it, the effort of a man who wanted an answer and was refusing to press for one because pressing would corrupt the answer. "Whatever you decide." She lowered her hand. She picked up the legal documents and the letter and the brass key from the desk. She held them and she looked at him. "I'll give you an answer," she said. "Tomorrow morning." He nodded. She walked out of the study. She went upstairs to her room, the room with the lock on the inside. The lock that she turned less and less often now, because she had stopped needing it, the way she'd needed it on the first night. And she sat on the bed, and she held the key to a strongbox containing enough money to build an independent life somewhere else. She sat with it for a long time. She thought about independence. She had wanted it her whole adult life, truly wanted it bone deep, the way you want water when you've been thirsty long enough that thirst becomes a permanent condition. She had organized every strategy she'd used at Augusta's house around the central goal of someday having enough to not need anyone. Enough to choose. She had it now. She held it in her hand, and she thought, is that what I want, to go somewhere and be independent? Alone and independent and no longer afraid. She held the key. She thought about 6 weeks of evenings at a shared desk. She thought about a man sitting on a dining room floor with his palms flat and visible and waiting. She thought about, we'll buy more china and show me where to start, and we have time. She thought about a man who had looked at her bruised wrists before he looked at her face. She thought about what her mother would have told her. Her mother who had been stubborn and warm and gone too soon. Who had loved her father with the particular uncomplicated certainty of someone who had simply decided and never looked back. Her mother would have told her something precise and probably slightly irritating. She would have told her that freedom and love were not opposites. She would have told her that a person who used their love to give you freedom was not a threat to your freedom. She would have told her to stop being so frightened of the good thing. Rosalie sat with the key in her hand until the light changed. She didn't sleep that night. Not from anxiety, not the old kind, not the kind that had her waking at sounds and bracing at shadows. Something different. The wakeful alertness of a person standing at a genuine threshold. Both directions visible, the choice real, in a way that no previous choice of her adult life had been real. She got up before dawn. She dressed. She went to the wardrobe and opened the back drawer and took out the remaining copies of the documents, the ones that had done the work. The duplicates she'd made the first night she'd understood what was happening, the bread still tucked beside them in its napkin. She looked at the bread. She thought about Miriam saying there is no shame in keeping bread in a drawer, and you'll know it's starting when you stop apologizing for firewood. She took the bread out. She put it back in the kitchen where it belonged. She went downstairs. She went to the study, and she sat at the desk, and she thought for a long time about the difference between choosing something because you have no other option, and choosing something because it is genuinely what you want. She had never in her adult life been in a position to make the second kind of choice. She was in that position now. The strongbox key sat on the corner of the desk. She picked up a pen. She wrote 3 lines on a piece of paper. She folded it. She set it on the desk where he would find it when he came in from the land. Then she went to the front porch and sat in the early morning cold and waited for the sun to come up over the fields of Blackwood Ridge. She heard him come in from the north field at 7. She heard him go to the study. She heard the silence from the study where he was reading what she'd written. She heard his footsteps cross the hall. She heard the front door open. He came out onto the porch. He stood behind her. She didn't turn. "You wrote 3 words," he said. "I know," she said. "That was all." "That was everything," she said. He came to stand beside her, not behind her, not in front of her, beside. The way he had always positioned himself in relation to her equal level, no advantage, no management. "I need you to say it," he said. His voice was very low. Out loud. So I know I'm staying," she said. She turned and looked at him in the early light. "Not because I have nowhere else to go. I have somewhere else to go. You made sure of that." She held up the key and then set it on the porch railing between them. "I'm staying because this is where I choose to be. Because you are the first person in 4 years who treated my choosing as something that mattered." She looked at him. "And because I love you. Which I have been refusing to say even to myself for at least 2 weeks. Silas looked at her. The feared man. The recluse. The scar. The person this county had decided was cold and dangerous and best avoided. He lowered his head. Not in grief, she knew grief in a person, and this was not that. It was the lowering of a man who has been holding himself braced against a particular kind of loss for so long that the loss's failure to arrive has temporarily removed the structure that bracing provided. He breathed. She reached up. She put her hand on his jaw again, the scarred side. He closed his eyes. "The 3 words," she said quietly, "in case you need to hear them in order." "I read the note," he said. "Say them back," she said. "So I know you understand they apply to you specifically, not to the house, not to the security. You." His eyes opened. "I know that," he said. "Say them anyway," she said. A pause. "I love you," he said, low, certain, with the specific weight of a man who does not say things he doesn't mean, and therefore means completely everything he says. She moved closer. He put his arm around her carefully, like a man handling something he is terrified of breaking, and then less carefully, as she leaned into it, as her weight settled against his side, with the natural ease of something finding its own level. They stood on the porch of Blackwood House in the early morning, and the land spread out in front of them, and the day was just starting, and it was very quiet and very still. "The East Field drainage," she said after a moment. He exhaled slowly. "It's handled. You adjusted the lower channel the way I suggested. I made an independent assessment that happened to align with your suggestion, yes." She bit the inside of her cheek against a smile. "Right. Completely independent," he said. She looked up at him. The corner of his mouth had done the thing, the not-quite smile, the place where a smile lived. "Silas," she said. You are going to have to get better at taking credit for things. I take credit for things. Occasionally, under pressure. That's sufficient. It is not sufficient." He looked down at her. "Are you going to argue with me every morning?" he said. She thought about it. "Probably," she said. "Good," he said. And there on the porch of Blackwood Ridge in the early Virginia morning, with the east fields visible, and the strongbox key, sitting on the porch railing, unclaimed, and the bread back in the kitchen where it belonged. Rosalie Mercer, who had arrived at this house with one small cloth bag and a question about debt, understood for the first time in her adult life what it felt like to be exactly where she had chosen to be. Not where she had been placed, not where survival had required her to stay, where she had chosen. The difference, she thought, was everything. It was absolutely everything. The morning after Rosalie put the bread back in the kitchen, Miriam found it. She didn't say anything immediately. She stood at the kitchen counter and looked at the 2 dinner rolls, sitting there in their napkin, returned whole uneaten, and then she turned around and looked at Rosalie, who was standing in the kitchen doorway, with her hands around a coffee cup. Miriam looked at her for a long moment. "Good morning," Miriam said. "Good morning," Rosalie said. That was all. But Miriam turned back to the stove with something different in the set of her shoulders, something that might in a different woman have looked like relief, and Rosalie understood that the bread had communicated what she hadn't found words for yet. That something had shifted. That the knowing in the chest had finally started catching up to the knowing in the head. She drank her coffee, and she felt for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure, genuinely ordinary. Not braced. Not calculating her position. Not running the quiet background assessment of threat and resource that had been her constant companion for 4 years. Just ordinary. Just morning. Just coffee and a warm kitchen and the sound of the estate coming awake outside. It lasted approximately 11 minutes before Silas came in from the barn and said, "The north pasture fence is down again." And she said, "I told you the post placement was wrong 6 weeks ago." And he said, "You told me it was suboptimal." And she said, "Which is a polite way of saying wrong." And he poured himself coffee and looked at her over the rim of his cup with that not quite smile, and the ordinary morning became something else entirely. Something better than ordinary. Something that was theirs. The weeks that followed were the quietest and the fullest of Rosalie's life, and the combination of those two things, quiet and full simultaneously, was so foreign to her experience that she kept waiting for it to resolve into one or the other. It didn't. Blackwood Ridge ran honestly now, and honestly it ran well. The tenant agreements Rosalie had rewritten were clear and fair, the kind of document that respected the intelligence of the people signing them without requiring a lawyer to interpret. Solomon Greer told Silas one afternoon that his family had farmed this land for 20 years, and these were the first terms he'd agreed to without reservation. And Silas said that was the point, and Greer said he knew that, and both men stood in the field and didn't say anything else because it had been said. Rosalie expanded the household accounts into a proper estate management system, organized, cross-referenced, built, so that anyone with basic numeracy could follow it without needing her specific knowledge to navigate. She did it deliberately. She built the system so it didn't require her because she wanted it to exist because it was the right way to run things, not because she was the only person who could. Silas noticed. "You built this so anyone could use it," he said one evening, looking over the new account structure. "Yes," she said. "Including if you weren't here." "Yes." He looked at her. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "But systems shouldn't depend on individuals. If something happened to me or you or both of us, the estate should be able to function. The tenants shouldn't suffer because the management structure was built around one person's knowledge." She paused. That's how Wycliffe was able to do what he did. Vale had made himself indispensable and then exploited it. "I won't build that." He was quiet. "You think about the tenants," he said. "They're people," she said simply. "They have families. They have been here for 20 years and more. Their stability matters." He looked at her for a moment with that expression. She was still learning to read the layered, deep-running thing that didn't come out easily in his face, because his face had learned to hold things in, and that made the moments when something came through anyway feel significant, like light through something very dense. "There's something I want to show you," he said. I took her to the east field that afternoon. Not the drainage issue that was resolved as she'd known it would be, adjusted in the way she'd suggested, and working correctly now. He took her to the edge of the property, where the Blackwood Ridge land met the county road, where a stand of trees had been cleared the previous winter and left as rough ground. "I've been thinking about this parcel," he said. She looked at it. Assessed it automatically. Soil condition, drainage, proximity to the road. "What for?" "That depends," he said, "on what you think it should be for." She turned to look at him. He was watching her with his hands in his coat pockets and a particular careful seriousness. "It's yours," he said. "To use. However you decide." "Silas, you once told me," he said, "that you had never had space that was genuinely yours. Not a room that someone else owned and could take back. Not a desk at someone else's estate." He held her gaze. "This parcel is in your name, already done. What goes on it is entirely your decision." She looked at the cleared ground. She had been thinking privately for several weeks. thinking about the women she knew whose situations mirrored what hers had been, financially dependent on relatives who resented the dependence with no practical path toward independence, because respectable paid work for women of their class was almost non-existent, and the alternative was exactly what Augusta had done to her: trade them off as a solution to someone else's problem. She had been thinking. She hadn't said it out loud because it wasn't fully formed, and because she was still, in certain deep ways, cautious about wanting things. She looked at the parcel. She looked at Silas. "I want to build something," she said. "Small to start. An actual office with proper books and a real desk where women who need help with accounts can come. Widows mostly. Women managing estates or farms or businesses after their husbands die who've never been taught to read a ledger. Women whose families are telling them to sell and remarry when what they actually need is someone to show them how the accounts work." She stopped. "I could show them. It wouldn't cost much to start. Just the space and the time and someone willing to sit across from a woman and treat her competence as a given rather than a surprise." Silas listened to all of it without interrupting. "How many women do you think need that?" he said. "In this county alone." She thought about it. "More than anyone would guess, because no one asks. Because the assumption is that they'll remarry, or that a male relative will take over, and no one thinks to ask whether they might simply want to understand their own finances." He looked at the parcel. "Build it," he said. "Just like that. You've been thinking about it for weeks," he said. "I can tell when you're working through something. Your coffee goes cold." He looked at her. "Build it, Rosalie. Put your name on it." She felt the warmth rise in her face and didn't try to stop it this time. "I will," she said. "I will put my name on it." 3 months after Justice Aldrich's hearing, Preston Wycliffe was formally charged. The charges were substantial fraud conspiracy to defraud manipulation of public land records. 2 of the other landowners whose estates he had targeted came forward with testimony once the formal proceedings made it safe to do so. The full scope of what he had been doing emerged in Aldrich's documentation like something geological, slow to form, enormous in scale, deeply embedded in the landscape by the time anyone could see it clearly. Wycliffe hired the finest lawyers available. How was convicted anyway? Rosalie heard the news from Forrest, who had ridden hard from the county seat with the express intention of telling her before anyone else could. She was in the study when he appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath, with the look of a man who had been looking forward to delivering something. "Guilty," he said, "on all primary counts." She set down her pen. She sat very still for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you, Forrest." "Yes, ma'am." He hesitated. "You all right?" "Yes," she said. And she was. Not elated. She had expected the conviction, had built the documentation to make the conviction inevitable, and what she felt now was not the hot satisfaction of vindication, but something quieter and more complete. A closing. A door shutting on something that had been open and drafty for a very long time. "Yes, I'm all right." She found Silas on the north field. I was talking to one of the tenant farmers about the winter crop rotation. A practical and grounding conversation about soil and seed and weather. And he saw her coming from a distance, and he said something brief to the farmer and came to meet her halfway. She told him. He nodded. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Vale's examination concludes next week." "I know," she said. "I think he'll receive some form of leniency given his cooperation. He should receive some form of accountability first." "He will," she said. "Both things can be true." Silas looked at her. "You're more forgiving than I am," he said. "I'm more practical than you are," she said. "Leniency for cooperation means other people will cooperate in the future when it matters. It's not about Vale specifically." He thought about that. "You see 3 steps ahead," he said. "I've had practice," she said. 4 years of it." He reached out. I took her hand. Straightforward, unhurried, not a gesture performed for any audience, just a man reaching for the hand of the person beside him, because she was beside him and he wanted to. She let her fingers close around his. They walked back toward the house. It was Miriam who created the crisis. Not intentionally. Miriam was not a woman who did things unintentionally. She was precise and deliberate in all things. But the effect was nevertheless a crisis, and it arrived on an otherwise unremarkable Thursday morning. Miriam came to the study with 2 cups of coffee and a letter. She set the coffee down. She put the letter in front of Rosalie. "This came this morning," she said, "addressed to you." Then she left, which was unusual. Miriam normally stayed to comment on correspondence. Rosalie looked at the handwriting on the envelope. She knew it. She had grown up looking at it on account ledgers and household records, and the precise controlled script of a woman who used handwriting as a form of performance, a communication of status through presentation. Augusta. She opened it. The letter was 3 pages. Rosalie read all of them. Then she set them down and sat looking at the wall for a long time. Silas came in 20 minutes later and found her still looking at the wall. "What happened?" he said immediately. She handed him the letter. He read it. His expression went through several things she could trace: initial caution, then something that might have been surprise, then a careful, deliberate settling. Augusta's letter said in the measured and precise language of a woman who had not apologized for many things and was finding the mechanism difficult to operate, that she was leaving Virginia. That she had sold what remained of Bellamy House to cover her acknowledged debts, which were being formally resolved as part of the broader proceedings. That she had arranged to go to her sister in Philadelphia, the sister she had not spoken to in 12 years, over a disagreement Rosalie had never been told the particulars of. The last page was the part Silas read twice. In it, Augusta said that she had told Wycliffe Rosalie was manageable because she had believed it. That she had believed it because she had needed to believe it. That a woman who depends on the diminishment of another woman to maintain her own position cannot afford to accurately assess the other woman's capabilities. She did not use the word sorry. She said, "I was wrong about what you were. I am less wrong now. That is the best I can offer, and I recognize it is not enough." She said, "Your mother was the better of us. You have demonstrated more clearly than was comfortable that you are her daughter." She said one more thing at the very end in slightly smaller handwriting, as if she had written it quickly before she could stop herself. "The $5,000 Blackwood paid for you has been returned to him in full from the estate proceeds. It seemed correct. You were not mine to sell." Silas set the letter down. He looked at Rosalie. "Are you all right?" he said. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I keep reading the last part, and I don't know what to feel about it." "You don't have to feel something specific about it," he said. "It can just be what it is." "What is it?" I thought about that in the way he thought about things genuinely, without rushing to fill the space. "A person seeing themselves clearly," he said. "Late, but still." Rosalie looked at the letter. "She's right that it's not enough," she said. "Yes," he said. "But it's something," she said. "Yes," he said. "It's something." She folded the letter and put it in the desk drawer. She would read it again later when she had more capacity to decide what it meant. Right now, she picked up her coffee and she looked at the man across the desk from her, the man who had returned $5,000 without telling her who had done it because it seemed correct, and mentioned it only because Augusta had, and she thought about all the things he did quietly that she only found out sideways. "You didn't tell me about the money," she said. "It wasn't relevant to anything." "It was a significant amount." "It was a debt that should never have existed," he said. "Returning it was simply accurate." She looked at him. "Silas." You are going to have to learn to tell me things directly." "I tell you things directly." "You tell me things eventually." "That's the same thing with better timing." She opened her mouth. "Eventually," he said with the absolute straightness of a man who knows he is losing an argument and has decided that dignity requires he lose it without visible capitulation. She closed her mouth. She looked at him. "I love you," she said, directly. Because she was learning that the things that mattered should be said out loud in full, without waiting for the exactly right moment, because the exactly right moment was usually just the current one. His face did the thing. The complicated, layered, light through something dense thing. "I know," he said. "Say it back." "You know I—" "Silas." He looked at her. "I love you," he said. Quiet. Certain. Complete. She nodded. Good, she said. Keep practicing. The corner of his mouth moved. You're relentless, he said. Yes, she agreed. You knew that in week 1. I did, he said. I chose you anyway. She felt something warm and real move through her chest. You chose me for the accounting, she said. Among other things, he said. She had filed that phrase the first time he'd said it. She had not forgotten it. She had simply been waiting for the right moment to revisit it, and here it was again, and she set down her coffee and looked at him fully. Tell me the other things, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, with the deliberate, unhurried honesty that was simply how he was built. The way Augusta described you as biddable, in a letter that also mentioned you'd kept a failing household solvent for 4 years. The way those two facts couldn't both be true, and the fact that she presented them as if they could told me exactly what kind of woman I was going to meet. He paused. And then you walked into that drawing room, and you didn't look frightened. You looked done, finished with something. And that was... He stopped. That was what, she said. Familiar, he said. She understood then. She understood what he had seen in her that evening. Not the biddable woman her aunt had tried to sell, not the useful woman, not the manageable one. The woman underneath all the years of performance. The woman who was done. Who had run out of the kind of resignation that looks like compliance and was down to whatever was bedrock underneath. He had recognized that, because he was bedrock too. We were both done, she said. Just differently. Yes, he said. And then we weren't, she said. He looked at her across the desk. No, he said. And then we weren't. The office went up in the spring. Small, solid, sensibly built, one large room with a proper desk and 4 chairs and 2 sets of account books and good light from the east-facing windows. A sign above the door that Rosalie wrote herself in the precise, clear handwriting she had spent years using to keep other people's accounts now used for something entirely her own. The Mercer office for women's accounts. R. Blackwood, proprietor. Silas stood behind her when she put the sign up. He didn't comment on the name. Mercer. Her father's name, the name she had asked to keep, and which he had never suggested she change. He simply stood there with his arms folded and looked at it with the expression of a man surveying something he considers correctly done. Well, she said. Plumb, he said. Signs level. She looked at him. That's your response. It's a good sign, he said. It's level. Those are both important qualities in a sign. Silas. You built something, he said. Quiet. Something real. Something that's going to help people who haven't had anyone bother to help them. He looked at her. I don't have the right words for that. The sign being level is the part I can say with confidence. She laughed. An actual laugh, the kind that came from somewhere unguarded, the kind she had almost forgotten she was capable of. He looked at her face when she laughed. He looked at it the way he had looked at the land on that stone wall, like something he was glad existed in the world and intended to keep knowing. The first women came within the week. A widow from the South County who had been told by her late husband's brother that the farm was too complicated for her to manage. A young woman whose merchant husband had died leaving accounts she couldn't read, and creditors who were counting on that. An older woman who had been managing her family's affairs for 30 years in secret behind her husband's name, and who came in and sat down and said, I just want someone to tell me I've been doing it right. And Rosalie sat across from her and looked at her books and said, You've been doing it right. You've been doing it brilliantly. I'm going to show you 2 things that will make it easier, and then you won't need me anymore. And the woman looked at her like she'd said something radical, because she had. Because you won't need me anymore was not what the world usually said to women who needed help. The world usually arranged things so the help was ongoing, and the need was permanent, and the dependency was maintained, because maintained dependency was useful to the people providing the help. Rosalie had no interest in being useful in that way. She wanted the women who came through the Mercer office door to leave it less dependent than when they'd arrived. That was the whole purpose. That was what she was building. Silas came by one afternoon, not to supervise, not to check, just passing on his way to the east field and stopping briefly in the doorway. She was in the middle of explaining compound interest to the merchant's widow, who was sharp and quick, and had been deciding within 10 minutes that she understood. Silas looked in. Their eyes met briefly across the room. He tipped his head, one of those small spare gestures she had learned to read like a language, and kept walking. She turned back to the widow. "The formula is straightforward," she said. "Once you see it, you'll wonder why no one showed you earlier." "Why didn't anyone?" the widow said. Rosalie thought about the answer to that for a moment. "Because it wasn't convenient for anyone who might have shown you," she said. "That's changing." So, the summer storm came in August. The way Virginia summer storms always came, without adequate warning, and with absolute conviction. Rosalie was on the porch when the first thunder rolled across the ridge. It was the same sound, the identical low, serious rumble that had been the backdrop of the worst evening of her recent life, the evening Augusta had slid a document across the table with her name and a price on it. The same sound, the same Virginia sky going dark in the same particular way. She stood on the porch and listened to it come. Silas came out behind her. He didn't say anything. He came to stand beside her, that was all just present just there, and they both watched the storm come across the land. She waited to feel what she'd always felt. The automatic bracing. The pull to make herself smaller. The particular dread that lived in the body independently of what the mind knew. It didn't come. What came instead was the sound and the air pressure and the smell of rain approaching, and the awareness that she was standing on the porch of a house that was hers. Genuinely hers, by choice and by deed, and by the slow, patient accumulation of 6 months of mornings that had belonged to her, and that the storm was just a storm, just weather, just summer. Thunder cracked. She didn't move. Silas's hand rested on the porch railing beside hers. He didn't take it. She had learned over these months that he never took. He offered. He was present. He remained, but he never took. Even this, now even his hand placed beside hers on the railing, was not a taking. It was an availability, a door he left open. She looked at his hand. She thought about the first time she'd reached for it on the dining room floor over broken china, coming back from a place that lived in the body and not the mind. She had crossed the distance then. She crossed it now. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and certain, the way they always did, not tightly, not possessively, just present. Just there. Like a person who has made peace with staying. The rain came. It hit the fields first, then the yard, then the porch roof, in a clean roar of summer water, and they stood in it together and didn't speak for a while. "Same kind of storm," she said. "Yes," he said. He knew what she meant. "I was afraid of them," she said. "Before." "I know," he said. She looked out at the rain on their land. "I'm not afraid of them anymore," she said. He looked at her, not the storm, her. "No," he said. "You're not." She stood in the rain sound with her hand in his, and she thought about a woman who had been sold for $5,000, and a question she had asked in a voice that didn't shake: "How much of your debt does my life erase?" And she thought about everything that question had led to: every locked door, and broken dish and bread, in a drawer, and copied ledger, and document laid on a justice's table. Every morning, she had woken up in a room that was hers. Every evening she had sat across a desk from a man who asked, rather than directed, every woman who had walked through the door of the Mercer office, and walked out, knowing something she hadn't known before. She thought about all of it. She tightened her fingers around his. There was a thing she wanted to say. She had been thinking about how to say it for weeks, in the way she thought about things she wanted to get exactly right, and she thought she had it now. "You know what you did," she said. "When you gave me the key. When you gave me the settlement. When you made it possible for me to leave." "Yes," he said. "You didn't rescue me," she said. "I want you to understand that. What Augusta did wasn't a rescue, even though it looked like one. What you did was different." She turned to look at him fully. "You made space. You kept making space. And I walked into it." She held his gaze. "That's not a rescue. That's something better." He looked at her. "What is it?" he said. "It's what happens," she said, when someone trusts you to find your own way and stays close enough to matter when you do. House was quiet. The rain came down on Blackwood Ridge on the east field, where the drainage ran correctly, now on the north pasture, where the fence had been properly fixed on the small solid office near the county road, with R. Blackwood proprietor, on the sign on 4,000 acres of land that had survived 7 years of patient dismantling, because one woman had arrived with one small cloth bag, and the particular capability of someone who had been invisible long enough to see everything. "The strongbox key," Rosalie said. "It's still on the porch railing from this morning." "I see it," Silas said. "I keep forgetting to put it away." "Perhaps you should." She turned and picked it up. She held it for a moment. Then she went inside and put it in the desk drawer where it lived now alongside Augusta's letter. Two things that represented the full range of what she had been given and given up and chosen and kept. She came back to the porch. Silas hadn't moved. She stood beside him. The storm was passing, already rolling east, the way storms do, taking itself somewhere else. She thought about everything it meant to stand here. Not to endure standing here. Not to remain standing here because the alternative was worse. To stand here because this precisely, this man and this land and this life she had built with her own capability and her own choices was where Rosalie Mercer had decided to be. And that decision, that single free, unobliged decision, was the thing that no one could take back. Not Wycliffe, not Augusta, not the $5,000 or the legal documents or the years of being treated as a liability someone else's life was structured around. She had chosen. And in the choosing, she had become finally and completely, and without condition, her own. The rain stopped. The land steamed quietly in the returning sun. Silas turned his scarred face toward the clearing sky, and Rosalie stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder, equal in the light, and neither of them spoke because there was nothing left that needed saying. Everything that mattered had already been said. Everything that mattered had already been done. And Rosalie Blackwood, who had arrived at this door with nothing but the courage to ask one honest question, stood in the sun on the porch of her own home, and understood with the full weight of a woman who had earned every word of it that she was exactly, precisely, irreversibly free.